Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 6-5 podcast. I'm the host today, Daniel Newman, principal analyst, founding partner at Futurum Research, joined by my always esteemed podcast host, partner in crime, Mr. Patrick Moorhead, Moor Insights Strategy. Patrick, good morning.
How you doing, buddy? I had a pretty good breakfast this morning. Good breakfast chat.
Yeah,
Those omelets went down nice.
I did. It was great. In case anybody's trying to figure out the cryptic messaging there from Mr. Moorhead, headed down to the city today. So you'll see my background is a little more sterile than normal when I'm hawking my logo like crazy. If you're watching this, of course, if you're listening, you wouldn't know that. But, we had a great breakfast downtown Austin. A little quiet down here right now, back into some COVID protocols. Very different in the city of Austin than the rest of the state of Texas. But doing what the state has to do, what the city has to do. Mayor Adler, we are watching. With that in mind, though, it's good to have a conversation, chat, everything, talking about pipe deals, talking about tech news of the week. And by the way, we're going to bring all that here today on this episode of the 6-5 podcast. We got a great show. We're going to talk about some Salesforce, Slack news, Intel getting a double dose of Architecture Day, talk about a couple of big earnings calls that happened this week for Cisco and NVIDIA, and then how could we not talk about that big old T-Mobile hack? Well, no one else is talking about it because everyone's talking about Robinhood, and who cares about that terrible company? Anyways, I'll hold my opinions on that for another show. Quick recap on the 6-5 podcast. First-time listeners, or if you haven't listened too many times, our whole theme of the show is 6 topics, approximately 5 minutes each, diving deep into the analysis and just a little bit of news. Basically, we provide what we think the news of the week means. For everybody out there, quick disclaimer, this show is for information and entertainment purposes only. And while we will be talking about publicly traded companies, we'll be talking about earnings and other things related to these companies. And don't buy any stocks because of anything we say here on this show. Am I clear? I am clear. So Patrick Moorhead, I have been talking a lot, but I think the way this thing works out is I get to keep talking. So the first topic of the week is Salesforce Slack. So if you've been living under a rock for a while, or you're not following the tech industry very well, Salesforce made a purchase of Stuart Butterfield's Slack, a very well-loved collaboration and asynchronous chat tool for something like $27 billion and change. And that happened a while ago. That news cycle passed. But what did happen in more recent weeks was that deal closed. And so now Slackforce, as you so affectionately like to call it, Mr. Moorhead, is official. And it moved forward. And this week, the company came out with its first big sort of Slack Salesforce. What does it mean for customers launch? Now, this thing, it was a online event because, well, unfortunately, we are still in the world where everything is online. Oh, by the way, we'll talk about that later, right, Pat? We were going to some events, but what happened to that? But anyways, so kicked off by Salesforce President COO Brett Taylor, joined by Stuart Butterfield. And essentially, there's kind of two themes I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about. One is what was actually announced and what it means, and two, what I think it's going to ultimately mean. So what they're doing here is they're basically creating this series of what they call Slack first offerings, three different silos, right? You've got the sales silo, you've got the service silo, and you got the marketing silo. And what they're really talking about is how thematically we take collaboration as this core digital IQ of a company and enable people to, instead of operating out of inboxes and operating out of various different messaging tools and operating out of different video tools, how can you create Slack as the center of the universe for the enterprise's way of doing business? That could be tying into ERP and CRM, that could be tying into customer experience, that could be tying into big data analytics tools that are used for creating customer experiences and marketing. And if this sounds a little bit like what you've heard Satya Nadella talking about with Teams, that's because it is very similar to what you're hearing Microsoft talk about with Teams. And the reason I bring that out is because with the acquisition of Slack, what we essentially have now is a bit of a two-horse race for what I'd say a fully vertically integrated stack of collaboration, business applications, synchronous, asynchronous, communications, and then this platform idea of being able to tie in all these different business application, tools and utilities inside of an organization and make them usable by people in all different parts of an organization, whether it's a frontline worker, an accounts payable person, a sales team member, or someone in the marketing team. So quickly back to the three silos. Slack for sales, which is all about developing and designing faster sales cycles. So company did a bunch of research, came up with the fact that using Slack to drive the sales process forward, they were seeing something like 15% faster sales cycles. Again, I don't think it's specific to Slack. It's more specific to using that asynchronous real-time communications, but building that in and integrating it into the CRM pipeline. That's where your magic sauce is created. Then you have the service, vehicle, similar, because service and sales to me very similar in the identities, but one is about gaining customers and the other is about keeping customers. And what they looked at is how does Slack and integration into this service cloud with Salesforce actually speed up resolution. And that same research found that there was about an 11% reduction in the time to resolution if you use the Slack first approach. And then finally, it was the Slack first marketing. And that's essentially all about decision making. So that one's a little more ephemeral, but the survey did come out to say something like 76% of marketers that are using Slack as part of their decision processing for making marketing campaign decisions did find that using Slack in combination with their traditional marketing tools did help them move faster. All right, Pat, you're moving me to the next thing. I see it. You're already flashing it, so I'm going to keep.
Sorry about that. I loaded. I was loading some content. My apologies.
All good. I was just saying we were going to give a sneak preview to our Intel Architecture Day topic, which will be coming up in a moment after you react to all the things I just said. But here's the last skinny analysis piece here. Early days. Kind of cool stuff. I get the idea of Slack first. Want to see more. Want to hear more case studies. They did have IBM come out and talk. Arvind Krishna showed up and was there. So they did have some real, examples of customers that showed up to talk about, how this technology, is helping these individual companies. I think Sonos also showed up. So that was good as well. But it's still early days. Want to see a lot more integration with the platform. Want to hear more from customers that are integrating it. And like I said, big two-horse race. And of course, you can't count out Zoom. You can't count out Cisco. But they have a huge advantage that they're now tying the collaboration to the business tools in such a seamless, ubiquitous way.
Wow, Daniel, that was a whole lot.
More like 4 minutes.
Give you a minute. So I pretty much agree with almost everything that you talked about. But the one thing that I'm constantly looking for here is, what did Salesforce do that they couldn't do without buying them? Or in other words, is there anything that they announced that they could not have done with the current API-based relationship? And I'm not seeing it yet. And I'm also not seeing, some incredible top line that Slack brings to the table. But I'm open to all of it. Maybe next week we'll be talking about how the Salesforce Plus integration with Slack is creating some new business opportunity as well. But listen, I didn't get briefed on this, so I really can't comment other than what I read from you and from other folks. But hey, I'm up to getting briefed Salesforce if you ever want to do that. You know where to find me if you want to.
We got some big topics though that you have been briefed on deeply, and I'm going to dive into those next week. Salesforce does do earnings Wednesday, so I expect to hear more to maybe to follow up on your exact comments. You made a great point, and we don't have time to dig into that point, but we'll come back to it about whether acquisition or strategic partnership makes more sense. And we have to answer that question all the time. Pat, Intel had a big day, spent 4 hours on with their architecture day. I watched it on and off all day long between the calls. You dove in deep. By the way, great Twitter stream, Pat. You sort of almost live blogged it using Twitter. Really enjoyed that. So if you're out there listening to this show, check out Pat's Twitter stream on Architecture Day. I'm sure he'll have a Forbes piece to come soon thereafter. But big day. And we're going to actually break this into two parts. We're going to talk right now about the client core strategy that was announced at Architecture Day. Later in the show, we're going to come back and talk about Datacenter. But Pat, I'll hand the mic to you.
Yeah. So first off, there's a lot of content here. We're going to break it into two, and there was so much content. I haven't even done a write-up. I decided to take the easy way out and just tweet, which was essentially, my notes plus some other stuff. But let's break this into, they discussed their cores, and they discussed their client product, which was Alder Lake, and then some graphic stuff. So I think to me, I'm not going to do this in order that Intel did this, but I think first and foremost, I am more convinced than ever that that Intel will gain graphics market share versus AMD and NVIDIA. I mean, I can't even come up with a worst case scenario that doesn't put them at the very high end of the mid range, even if AMD and NVIDIA increase performance 50%. But who knows? What could happen execution wise? I feel pretty good on the graphics side because they're partnering with at least on the consumer side, they're partnering with TSMC on an N6 node, and they've got a multi-year roadmap. The second thing that I'll jump into is the cores themselves. You may be familiar with ARM's big little configuration. It's a big core to do big work and a small core to do little work. This is very similar to that. You have an E core for efficiency, and you have a P core for performance. And then, whether it's a server part or a client part, they're putting P cores and E core, and then the threads and the workloads being managed by a thing called Thread Director. There were some early issues with Big Little that had to do with thread management, but I heard enough from Intel that with Windows 11, it's going to operate well. I feel like Intel learned a lot from what ARM had done. And also, Intel had done symmetric multi-threading for years. So it's not like they don't know how to do threads. They actually do know how to do threads. So basically, Intel said that an E-core 40% better integer performance, or same performance at 40% lower power as Skylake in a one-threaded, and then in a four-thread configuration, 80% better integer performance or 80% less power, which is pretty impressive. But again, we have to see the product that comes out to see what it really is. The P core, right? Bigger performance. They're claiming a 19% advantage, Daniel, over an array of different benchmarks from Spec to Sysmark, Crossmark, PCMark, Web Expert, and Geekbench. I don't know the mixture of GPU or AI that's in there, so it's a big TBD for me. Probably the biggest thing that they added on there, and this is for data center only, is this new DL inference and training engine called AMX, and they're claiming 8x improvement on int 8, and that's pretty big. And we'll get into it when we talk about Sapphire Rapids, the actual product that integrates that. And let me finalize here on the actual client product that takes P cores, takes E cores, and then takes a bunch of fixed function engines, adds DDR5, PCIe 5, Wi-Fi 6, Thunderbolt 4 in a product called Alder Lake. And this is a chip that scales from ultra portables at 9 watts to 125 watt desktops on 3 packages. It is a monolithic design, but it is going to be a smaller die than, let's say, the server part that's a distributed piece. So net, this wasn't a product launch. I do feel like, if I am a betting man, that this will be very competitive in notebook and desktops that are lower core count, or let's say desktops with an overall core count between 8 and 16. I think AMD will still win the core battle. I do think it's probably likely that on a core to core basis, on single threaded perspective, that Intel will probably retake the crown until AMD comes out with their next architecture. So and this is going to be on what's called Intel 7, which is very similar to TSMC's. They call it 7 nanometer, but it's not really 7 nanometer. So there's where we are. 2 cores and Alder Lake.
Yeah, there's a lot of updates there, Pat, and you went in deep, and my responsibility as host today is to keep things moving. But if I can add a couple of just quick thoughts on this one. Pat Gelsinger said, bring the geek back. And this is what Intel's been doing with its recent communications, whether that's been the recent IDM announcements, whether it was Architecture Day. The company is really trying to provide some guidance in terms of how it intends to reclaim or maintain leadership in various areas of the business, giving a lot of transparency. Execution, I remain to say, and every time I talk about Intel, execution, that is going to be the litmus test for the company. It's not about what they're saying they're going to do. It's been about, over the past several years, what they're saying they're going to do and then what's actually been done. Pat Gelsinger is the say-do guy. He came in from the beginning, said, I'm going to say, I'm going to do, I'm going to execute. If the company can execute, there are opportunities to recapture, regain some market leadership, and certainly some market share in different areas. That is TBD. But we're watching, and we'll be talking about it. You can count on that here on the 6-5 podcast. Pat, let's move to some earnings. How about that?
Let's do that.
Yeah, is everybody's head still attached after Pat's deep dive there? That was some good stuff there, Pat, by the way. I look forward to that article. Get that published, man, because, everybody needs the Moorhead synthesis.
Well, here is the hard part, Daniel, is that these weren't product launches. These were technology announcements. And I can guess all day long, but unless you know frequency and core count and pricing, you're almost guessing. I mean, I can extrapolate from some of the stuff that they said about their core performance, but I don't know really the performance of AMX. I don't know the performance of by the way, they pulled off AVX 512 off their client, which was doing most of the heavy lifting for machine learning on clients. So a lot of questions. They definitely tee themselves up. They have a lot of content available for the Alder Lake launch.
Hey, I didn't say you could talk anymore.
I'm sorry. Did I do another loop back?
Loop back. All right. So we're going to just skip the. No, I'm kidding. Let's talk about Cisco. Another big week of earnings on. Was it Wednesday? Pat, no, it was Tuesday. No, it was Wednesday. It was Wednesday. On Wednesday, NVIDIA and Cisco both reported. We'll talk about both of these when they show. Unfortunately, Robinhood reported, which have I mentioned? Terrible company. Terrible company. Anyway, I'll explain that later someday, but not here, not now. So you just have to know, terrible company. But Cisco, not a terrible company. As anybody that kind of followed the show and followed our analysis on earnings, again, why we do this, not because we're equities guys, not setting price targets. What we like to do, though, is look at how does this moment of truth that comes out on a quarterly basis really, connect to the strategy that these companies are putting in market. How are they doing? Are they interesting? Are they staying innovative? Are they on the front edge? IT OEMs or large IT infrastructure, especially prem-based, actually were some of the slowest recovery names in the tech, recovery that happened during COVID. That was because people stopped implementing big data centers on-prem and moved a lot of things to SaaS and public cloud. So chip, SaaS, public cloud all roared. Names like HPE, Cisco, Dell, IBM, all with big on-prem infrastructure, among others, were slower to come back. The great news about this quarter and the end of the year here for Cisco, which it was the end of their fiscal year 21, was that the growth is coming back. Now, when I say growth is coming back, this isn't a Zoom boom. This is a high single digit, which, by the way, if you find the tweet, Pat, out a few hours before I actually said, expect mid-single digit growth with an upside of high single digit growth. So I called it. I just want to point that out. I like to call that kind of stuff, and then I like to brag about it when I do.
It's the victory lap, baby. We all need victory laps.
So beat on earnings, beat on revenue, but let's just talk about a couple of things that stood out about the beat. One, really great growth in their infrastructure platforms. Now, if you know how Cisco's revenue breaks down, they break it down into like 5 buckets. Okay, you got infrastructure, application, security, other, which is always fun, and then services. Where did growth come from? Well, infrastructure platforms represents more than half of its revenue. So basically, when they're big infrastructure, this is UCS, this is core data center networking, when that part of the business doesn't grow, Cisco doesn't grow. Well, this quarter, it saw 13% growth year over year. It saw strong growth from various regions, including 8% domestic growth after only almost being flat on constant currency last quarter. Also, really strong growth coming out of the Asia Pac geo for the company. Interestingly, the applications group didn't grow. Now, this is an interesting one to unpack because in applications, of course, you're looking at everything from monitoring, observability, you got things like AppD, you got things like WebEx. What's going on there? Because with WebEx, you would expect massive growth because of all the adoption of video and collaboration. However, with Cisco, it's a $1+ billion a quarter business, and there are a number of parts and pieces in that applications business, but it was basically flat. It was down a 1% number. I think a lot of people want to know a little more about how WebEx individually is doing, because when you see Zoom growing in double and triple digits, and you see Microsoft with 250 million Teams users, what's going on there? But we're watching it. But maybe, Pat, the most interesting number, and I'll let you elaborate a little bit on this, and I think we can keep talking about this, is the $4 billion number claimed in the company's software revenue.
Right.
It moved to 81% subscription revenue, 19% perpetual, $4 billion, and they're now proclaiming to be among the biggest software companies in the world, which my only thought, and then I'm going to let you go from here, is that this is something that outsiders, investors, and customers should feel very bullish about, because this is the pivot that an infrastructure company needs to make to stay relevant in the long term. And it appears, based on the percentage of subscription and the size of that business, that the company is in very good shape, and it's growing at a good clip, about 15% on subscription.
Wow, you did leave me something. I appreciate that. So, yeah, perfect segue, right? Cisco for years was a networking infrastructure company, and then they moved into a full service infrastructure with networking, compute, and storage. And then, they moved along, and then, almost like overnight, and maybe that's just overnight because I'm old and can't keep track of my years, Daniel, they turned into a software and services company. And this quarter was, almost a quarter of me talking out of both sides of my mouth. Equipment order growth was triple digit. No, sorry. Was 31%. Product orders. Okay, that's product. That's infrastructure. That's the best that they've done in a decade. And then now the other side of our mouths, we're talking about it being one of the biggest software companies out there with a $16 billion run rate. So I think that the software growth is incredible. The services progress is incredible. I'm going to do the double click on that 4 billion. I asked Cisco for an explanation of that. What's their list? They couldn't provide me one. So I'm thinking about creating my own. It's not that I don't believe them. It's just, I don't want to throw down that, one of the largest software plays out there without being more precise. Their CFO said it was they were in the top 10. It does include SaaS. But it's going to be hard to figure that out. But I guess that's why we get paid to do what we do, Daniel.
Yeah, that's a great point, and a fairly important point that we belabor on is we get encouraged by numbers like that, but we want to unpack it. We want to unpack it for you out there because, big claim. Obviously, when you think of big software companies, I said this in our briefing, Pat. Most people don't think about Cisco, but if this accomplishment puts them in that category, top 10, top 5 global software vendors, it almost needs to be reconsidered a little bit how the company is marked. We say things like IT OEM or big infrastructure players, but are they?
Yeah. By the way, this claim, and by the way, you just double back there, so I'm going to double back. This top 10 software claim reminds me of the WebEx claim. What was it? Improving the experience by 100x or something. And I was like, okay, what's the calculation that went into 100x, right? And I learned in my experience in .com 1.0 .bomb that you can put a number to anything, and spreadsheets don't lie. But come on, man. Give us some detail on this top 10 software thing.
Yeah, let's keep pressing, Pat. Let's keep asking, and eventually, I think we'll get it. It's a good organization. Chuck Robbins is doing a good job. He fought a very hard fight over the last several months with supply chain, with having a large part of the business dependent on this on-prem infrastructure, that core business, and returning to growth. And by the way, the guidance was encouraging to mid-high single-digit guidance for next year. So another solid year ahead for Cisco. But you know what? You can stick with us here because we'll keep talking about it next quarter. You can be sure we'll be coming back and double clicking, triple clicking, quadruple clicking on what's going on with Cisco. But you know what, Pat? We had talking about doubling. Today was a double Intel day. We love chips. We love SaaS. We started with SaaS. We're talking about chips. We're going to talk a little more about chips now. And then, hey, guess what? The next segment is going to be about chips, but a different company. Don't worry about that. Pat, take us through Intel Data Center on Architecture Day.
Yeah, so I took everybody through the cores, and the cores can go client and data center. And then I hit Alder Lake, which was the client product. And now I'm going to hit all things data center, which was as equally as impressive. And let me put this up real quick. So from a data center point of view, you're looking at AMX, you're looking at XeHPC, which is an architecture for graphics for HPC, AI, and ML. You've got Mount Evans, which is an IPU, also known as the DPU, in regards to Marvell and the vernacular that NVIDIA does. But let me jump in here. Okay. Now I just got notes all over the place here, Daniel. So first off, if anything, Intel is going straight after NVIDIA's A100 with a product called Ponte Vecchio. And Ponte Vecchio is it's the most beastly product that I've seen after the NVIDIA A100. Over 100 billion transistors. Essentially what it's doing is it's accelerating AI, HPC workloads. And that's exactly what the A100 does. And Intel's doing it, gosh, with a ton of technology. I mean, they're 3D stacking this thing, then they're connecting the 3D stacks via EMIB. They're going, TSMC is doing part of it with N5 process, which is the real name for the fake 5 nanometer. And then the base tile is a Intel 7. I mean, this thing is a work of art, and quite frankly, this thing is either going to go down in flames as the second biggest bust in Intel history. I would say the first was the many-core architecture that they were trying to put together years back, or this is going to be an absolute stunning success. But I believe just based on some of the commitments that some of the national labs have made, they are going to sell many of these things. Let me go to Sapphire Rapids. Sapphire Rapids is essentially the code name for the next Xeon, and I've lost my notes, so I'm just riffing at this point. But essentially, it's not a monolithic die. It's a distributed die that's more similar to AMD's EPYC architecture, and then it's put together via EMIB technology. And that's really good. Intel's issue is not necessarily design, it's execution. And what we know from a distributed architecture is that your compute tiles are really the only things that have to be in leading edge. So compute tiles are on Intel 7. I don't know what the rest of the chip is. My guess is that it's probably 14 nanometer. But essentially it lowers risk for manufacturing. Okay, so I know that's not sexy for everybody to hear, but it's a reality of where Intel is. It's all a bunch of P cores. There's no E cores in this. We have no idea how many P cores. We have a little bit of idea as to performance, but in the server world, quite frankly, it's about delivered performance, not some benchmarked specant performance. Interestingly enough, even though it's a radically different architecture, Daniel, the messages between this and Ice Lake are very similar, right? You've got a ton of acceleration. You've got acceleration for data streaming, crypto, compression, decompression, AI, which we had before, but there's an adder which really hits some of the issues with some of the major CSPs out there. And those are things like data streaming and microservices. So with microservices, there's this startup penalty and there's this wind down penalty for microservices, and Intel's going to be accelerating that. Now, with acceleration, some of it is you have to directly write to an API, which is, takes heavy lifting, and some is just inherent in the design itself. Obviously, the ones that, aren't going to take acceleration are things like microservices acceleration. But again, this wasn't a product launch. I have no idea how this compares to AMD. My guess is, if you had to put a gun to my head, is that it's going to have AMD is still going to win on multiple cores, and Intel is going to win on everything that's accelerated that's out there. Because quite frankly, AMD doesn't accelerate anything with their last 3 generations. It's just hardcore, integer and floating point, and just a ton of cores down there. My final thing I'm going to talk about is, one of the hot topics out there is acceleration at the edge. So offloading, the main server to run apps and everything else is offloaded. Networking functions, crypto, security, even accelerating storage. Intel came out with its first ASIC-based design called Mount Evans. And that's ASIC versus an FPGA. That means it's hardened. That means it's going to be lower power. It's going to mean it's higher performance in the same die space. But this is flying primarily in the face of Marvell and a little bit in the face of NVIDIA. NVIDIA is really focused right now on data center networking, offload, and Marvell is primarily focused on and seeing success in CSP and carrier networking offload. That's it. That's the tweet.
That's it? That's the tweet? Oh my gosh, yeah. Follow Pat's tweet stream. Pat, write an article, for crying out loud. Jeez Louise, you've got this covered. But no, lots of things here. I'm going to spend a little, just a few minutes, not even, because you spent all my minutes talking. Pat and I, you ever sense that out there, all of our listeners, that sometimes he and I get a little jelly of each other when one of us takes all the oxygen out of the topic. But look, when it comes to the data center, Intel's got a few major opportunities and constraints. The opportunities and constraints are, one, I talked about this with cores. It's returning on process leadership. It's execution. Delays have been its biggest thorn in its side. A recent Sapphire Rapids delay, even though it was a very brief one, was looked upon very, very negatively. You got a lot going on with both DPUs and acceleration. You saw on the client side some announcements about Intel and discrete GPUs, but the space NVIDIA plays in, the company has been very successful, is migrated from training to inference. Cisco has some things, Ponte Vecchio and One API, that it's trying to build to become more the center of an AI acceleration GPU existence. But that's a huge market space, and these architectures are going to be key to the company participating and competing in those spaces. I like what you talked about with the edge. I like everything DPU. It's coming in a number of different fashions though right now, and it's going to be very competitive. Marvell executed very well in the DPU space. So Intel, is going to definitely have to work very hard to compete there. And I have no doubt that it is capable of doing so. And then, of course, you have to compete with what cloud providers are doing on their own. You look at things like AWS Nitro and what has been created in the public cloud to be able to do these things. But of course, that's for public cloud workloads. Intel is great not only in the public cloud and being a cloud partner, but also obviously to all of those prime data centers that are going to require compute power and all those OEMs that are going to build hardware to support that investment. So good coverage, Pat. Write an article. If you don't write an article, everybody just follow his tweet stream. I'm sure it's in our show notes. He likes to share tweets. I don't do that, so you'll have to read my articles. All right, let's move on. We got 2 more topics. We have gone a little bit long, but I don't think anybody ever complains about too much value from our podcast. Pat, I'm going to hand the mic to you. You're going to talk about NVIDIA earnings and NVIDIA gaming growth, and I'm going to talk about some other NVIDIA stuff when you're done. So just leave a little bit of air for me to breathe.
Yeah, so, gosh, I feel like we're repeating ourselves every quarter on NVIDIA. I mean, they kick butt on top line, gross margin, net income, and EPS. I mean, revenue is up 68%. But I want to focus on gaming. I mean, gaming was up 85%, which is just insane. And, the meme for a long time, and I totally get the meme because it was deserved, because when we went through the cryptocurrency bust, NVIDIA had been saying very similar stuff that, hey, we believe that most of this is gaming. But one factoid that came out that impressed me was that 80% of Ampere, and Ampere is the latest and greatest, with ray tracing architecture, is the low hash rate. And essentially, NVIDIA came out with low hash rate, essentially, crippled it for doing Ethereum mining. So if 80% is LHR, you have to assume that at least 80% of Ampere number, which is this gaming number, is real gaming. And that's the only way that I can look at it. Now, NVIDIA, I think, so it doesn't get sued and it's conservative, is telling people, well, we actually can't tell you what's gaming and what's not. And I appreciate this, but I stand back and I am absolutely amazed. This market, PC gaming market, is accelerating, Daniel. And I could originally attach this to COVID, which was, we can't go outside, so we're going to sit inside and play games. But more people are opening up, yet NVIDIA keeps cranking out record numbers for gaming. So gaming's hot, dude, and is not a transitory thing. And for what it's worth, this could also have a positive effect on the overall PC numbers. And while, yeah, you can buy a PCI Express card and throw it into your gaming rig, a lot of people to match that up with the right processor and memory should be a boon to every semiconductor space that's in gaming PCs. So kicking butt. And we're gonna have to see what AMD does. I mean, where's AMD in all this? Where's their, knock it out of the park graphics numbers?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to have them because NVIDIA is busy taking all the meat off the bone. It's a very bare chicken out there for everybody else that's hungry. But good for Jensen, good quarter, Pat. I'll stick off the gaming because you covered that pretty well. But just as a whole, 10 straight quarters of outpacing all expectations. Just massive growth. They record-breaking revenue not only for gaming though, but for data center and for ProViz as well. Just huge overall revenue. I mean, you're talking about a year ago that we did 3.8 billion in revenue. This year, 6.5 billion. Billion. I'm saying that with a B because it's not like that is massive revenue growth. The gaming stuff, as you mentioned. Listen, data center though is hot. And this is a situation where NVIDIA finds itself in the exact right position in the markets it's in. It's in this gaming market where this expanded TAM just keeps coming, and they're grabbing such a strong share of that TAM. But I actually would say, and at risk of making, putting myself out there a little bit, the data center growth opportunity is just monumental in terms of, it's nascent at this point. We're just touching the surface of what AI is going to be doing in the data center and the power of the GPU, whether that's a subscription-based cloud offering, whether that's, base command. And here's the thing is, I tweeted out, and I got a lot of engagement on my tweet about NVIDIA's earnings, and a lot of people going, how does a hardware company have 60+% margins? It's not a hardware company. NVIDIA is, whether it's their gaming AI, it's about software, it's about frameworks, it's about hardware. They put together the whole package, and that is why the company has been so successful. Just the list of announcements, it's starting to look like AWS's quarters, just the things they're doing, whether it's Launchpad, TensorRT 8, winning 342 of the 500 supercomputers in the top 500 supercomputing lists. It's the ML perf results, winning. Certified systems, it's what they're doing with DPUs and Bluefield. It's the announcements of both Azure and Google making major commitments in their cloud offerings to roll out NVIDIA. And like I said, the AI opportunity is still in its early days. And that's what's most interesting about it, is they're getting a chunk of a market that's tiny compared to what this market is going to be. The overall growth in AI and the opportunity for AI is going to be massive. So if NVIDIA can continue its momentum, you can expect big things. And then, of course, it's seeding other areas. ProViz had one of its biggest quarters ever. And then automotive, Pat. I mean, automotive is like this area that, over the next 10 years, the disruption we're going to see is going to be massive. I enjoyed listening to Kathy Wood yesterday as everybody's beating up her investment thesis at ARC, but she looks at things like AI and she's looking at things like 3D, and she's talking about the world doesn't even understand yet how big these changes are going to be and how much this is going to change the future. Jensen gets it. That's what he's building. It's hard not to be very positive about NVIDIA. It's hard to not think. And then, of course, last thing, just one comment about this, because we could spend a lot of time. ARM deal. At one point, the valuation of NVIDIA, I believe, was tied to the expectation of ARM. I believe with its growth over the past several quarters, its valuation is not based on the ARM deal anymore. In fact, I think most of the market sees the ARM deal as a coin toss at best. But whether they own ARM or they continue to license ARM cores, NVIDIA is going to roll forward either way. If they get the deal, though, I actually see it as an exponential accelerator towards that $1 trillion market cap valuation. So very interesting run for NVIDIA. Could talk more about it, but we're going for a record long show today, Pat. So I'm going to have to get us on to the next topic. And this one will be a little bit quicker, but doesn't make it any less important. T-Mobile, Pat. Both of us are T-Mobile users. So I will put that out up front. T-Mobile this week, there's been details emerging, but very little comment from the company about a hack which they believe could impact more than 100 million T-Mobile USA customers. It was first reported in Vice that there was a dark web, basically post that said something they were selling using Bitcoin, a subset of data that was available from this hack. Now, a little bit more on the hack is that it's interesting because, 100 million personal records, a lot of our records are already out there. If you've been breached, you probably found out in one of these breaches or another, you're in them. 36 million, they're saying unique personal records. What's in this hack? You have phone numbers, physical addresses, IMEI numbers, which means they can identify your device, driver's license information, and social security numbers. Why is this crazy, and why am I just stunned that T-Mobile hasn't said more and isn't doing more in terms of the PR on this side of things? Well, when you have this kind of data, look, you can probably aggregate all those different pieces of data about somebody across the web if you just search because of what's out there and available. But having that set of data together basically gives the ability for things like spoofing a text message from T-Mobile to think, hey, I want a phone upgrade. You get a link in your thing that's a phone upgrade. Suddenly you've been hacked because they know your device information. They know your driver's license information. They know your name. They can create really authentic looking spoofing messages out of this. And things like that are really, really scary. So my feeling on this is, Pat, is that these hacks are going to happen. Big companies are going to continue to be vulnerable. T-Mobile may or may not be at any major fault of how this actually happened. Of course, there's going to be some fault identified of how this was happened, but every company is vulnerable. What I'm worried about and what I'll say to the market right now is T-Mobile needs to come out and address this in a very proactive manner. We've said that after SolarWinds. We said this after the Microsoft hack. We're going to say this here. I'm worried that T-Mobile isn't saying more with such a big data breach in play and such an opportunity for hackers to take advantage of this data.
T-Mobile is, I would say, one of the most consumer savvy companies out there in terms of their relationship with them. And while the company hasn't told me this, I've interacted with them enough just to know that if they knew what was wrong and if they knew what would happen and they knew the full ramifications of it, they would be talking about it. So my belief is that they just don't know, they don't have all the details. And it's those types of details that are don't say something unless you actually know it's true. It's kind of like the Taliban won't take over Kabul, right? Because they have 300,000 troops and they have 300,000 and the Afghanis have the other way around, have 7,500, and it's just like, don't say something unless you've got your facts straight. So I'm kind of thinking it's one of those types of things. But over time, if you don't have your facts together, it engenders a lack of trust because you're not talking and you can't figure out what happened.
Yeah, absolutely, Pat. And like I said, it's quick. You made a great point. They get consumers, but I feel like they're missing something here. We'll see. I'm sure there's meetings going on all day long. I'm sure they're talking about it. It's not like they're just business as usual. Stunningly, I watched the stock price barely move. I remember when SolarWinds and some of these other hacks happened. But T-Mobile's a big established company. It's very conservative. It moves at a much more telecom than a tech rate, and it tends to be a little less affected by this kind of news, both on the up and the downside. Pat, this is a great show, great commentary. Thanks for unpacking all of Intel Architecture Day, because my gosh, anybody that was listening realized that was a ton of insights there. But we did it, Pat. Back to the beginning, we covered Slack, we covered Salesforce, we covered Intel, we covered Cisco, NVIDIA, T-Mobile, and so much more, always here on the 6-5. Hit that subscribe button, join us, be part of our community. Good comments to me, bad comments to Pat. We appreciate all your support and listenership. Get us on Spotify, get us on Apple, watch us on YouTube, but just be sure you're checking us out and sharing us with your friends. For this episode, we got to go. We got to say goodbye because it's time for us to get on with our days. We appreciate you. We'll see you soon. Bye now.
Have a great weekend.